You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. Have you ever walked through the woods or outside, looked around at plants and think, who discovered those? Who is doing the research to discover new plants in Mississippi and elsewhere? We're going to talk with someone today who not only does it, but teaches students at Southern Miss to do it. He is Dr. Mack Alford on the podcast.
This episode of Mississippi Outdoors Podcast is sponsored by the Foundation for Mississippi Wildlife, Fisheries, Parks, and Marine.
He is Dr. Mack Alford with us today on the podcast. Dr. Alford, thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
You have had a busy day, a presentation already today at the museum across the street, right?
I did. I talked about the rediscovery of a plant species in Mississippi.
A rediscovery of a plant species. So previously known, thought it was gone or was gone, and then rediscovered. Well, it was described by J.K. Small way back in the early 1900s, and everybody ignored him. They thought it wasn't a good species. There were basically no records of this thing, and so nobody thought there was a thing. And then I had a grad student who kept finding these weird plants, and some other people at the Natural Science Museum had also found these weird things. And it turns out those weird things were the same thing that were described 100 years ago. Wow.
And so we've brought it back from obscurity.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay, so this may seem like a really broad question, but how would you know that you have discovered a new plant? Anywhere, but particularly in Mississippi. Like, how do we know that we discovered a new one?
That's really a hard question because you have to know what other plants are already there.
Yeah.
And so you have to be familiar with what already exists to know if something's different. And then when things are different, sometimes they're just different because they grow in a different place. So for example, when my grad student brought this, potentially new species to me, the first thing I said was, plants vary.
Okay.
It's growing on limestone in the woods. Of course, it's going to look different. It's not going to be the same. So, plants do vary. And if we want to know if it's really something new, then we got to dig a little deeper.
Yeah.
So we got to go out and investigate them in the field. We got to look at them under a microscope. We can sequence their DNA, look at their genetics, their relatives. We can look at all their structures, their anatomy, their pollen, their seeds, all kinds of things, and see, are they consistently different than everything else? Or is this just part of the variation that's out there?
Yeah.
Is there like a plant that everybody knows where you could say plants vary, and I guess something that you could point to that people are like, oh, okay, I understand.
Like it's all the same, but they look so different.
Yeah. So, a lot of people around here plant camellias. We have lots of cultivars of camellias. So some just finished blooming that have red flowers. They look like roses. Yeah. And some are really tall bushes, and some are short bushes, and some have white flowers, and some have stamens, and some don't have any male parts at all. It's just all petals. But they're all still just camellias. Camellia japonica. They vary. Another example I use in class, and maybe it's a little politically incorrect. Humans. Humans vary.
Yeah.
And, if you were an alien and you popped into Earth and landed in Norway and South Africa, you would say, oh, well, these are very different. But then, if you look at humans across the range of our species, you connect between Ethiopians and Indians and Papua New Guineans and Russians and Irish. We're just part of the variation. But so sampling is really important in science, of course, and in botany to determine if you have a new species. You really have to have a good sample, too, to know that you've seen what's out there.
Yeah. Okay. So a good sample or a good sample size. And you were talking about some of the, the research that would have to go into, do we have a new plant? You use the word we have to do this and we have to do that. Like, who is we? Like, is it students, grad students? Is there organizations you work with? Like, who is we?
All of the above. So
Okay.
Okay. Often there's a person who comes up with a question, like in the case of this rediscovered plant, there were people at the Natural Science Museum who had collected it and thought that it was weird. And then I had a grad student who was pretty convinced that it was something new. And then I had an honor student do some lab work. He actually did all the genetics work on this thing. So it was a whole team of people working on this. And the other thing is, we ultimately concluded it probably grows in other places in the Southeast. So I had some colleagues from Georgia, from Tennessee, who helped us out collecting plants, because you can't be everywhere at the same time. Can't. Yeah. And so, yeah, a lot of teamwork.
Yeah. How about that? All right. So also, you mentioned some of the tests and different things that go into that. You know, from a biology standpoint, most of us, high school, we dissect something, maybe a frog. Do you dissect a plant? And like, if so, how do you dissect the plant?
Yes, absolutely. We dissect plants. The usual part we dissect are the flowers, and that's because there are a lot of important parts there. And because they're important in reproduction, they tend to be a little conservative. And so, for example, if we collect a plant and dry it, if we bring it back to the lab, we might add some water and soap to moisten it up, and we'll take a little razor and a dissecting needle or some forceps and move the pieces apart so that we can count the male parts, count the female parts, see how many seeds there are. But you can dissect other parts too. So we make sections of leaves, sections of wood. I mean, we dig them up out of the ground and look at the kind of roots that they have. Yeah.
When all that's, that research is done, where does that go? And again, I know it's a really broad question, but where does that go and into whose hands? And is that also something that's shared across that big network of people in other states and everything that you just talked about?
Yes, absolutely. So there are two main places where it goes. So when we study plants in the field, we collect museum specimens of them. And so we usually, for most plants, we dry them and we glue them to these acid-free papers that we put in cabinets in a museum called a herbarium. Sometimes if it's an aquatic plant, we collect them in alcohol or formaldehyde or something else. And that way, other people can study what we have seen, because it is a science. And as you and all the listeners would know, in science, things have to be repeatable.
Yeah.
So we can't just say we saw something. We got to have proof we saw something. And oftentimes these days, we also take pictures and upload them to websites like iNaturalist and other places. The other thing that we do is we publish papers. So in science, the sort of gold standard is to have a published paper. And so we have to submit our data, our analyses, our write-up, our discussion about what we found, and it gets reviewed by other experts in that area. And if they say it's okay, then it gets published. And then these days, all the other sorts of data, for example, like spreadsheets and other kinds of analyses that we do, they can be uploaded online so that people can access those. And again, they can do their own analysis if they don't believe us.
Yeah. As you talk, I was thinking about, or trying to think about and consider your students at Southern Miss. And I'm sure, socially, demographically, everything is probably this, you get the whole spectrum. But I would think also kids who are, I don't know what to call them kids, but students who are from an outdoors background, hunters, that this is something that you probably run into. Those type of students get really interested in this, I would think, because all it takes is to run into a diehard turkey hunter, deer hunter, who will talk to you an hour about food plots and types of food and food sources, and as it relates to plant life. I would think that those guys are really interested in that.
Yes, absolutely. And when I came back to Mississippi in 2005, that was one of the things I enjoyed most, was trying to connect to students, especially through hunting and also through gardening or farming. Unfortunately, the sad fact is we don't have that many students who hunt anymore or who have mothers or grandmothers with gardens. And so it's a little bit harder for me than it used to be, even 20 years ago, to make those connections. And I still have a section, for example, in my general botany class where we talk about economic plants or food plants. But even then, a lot of students don't cook. So, having basil in their food doesn't mean that much to them. But I do hope I connect to them. And I also tell a lot of my students, because I teach a lot of conservation biology oriented people. And sometimes they forget that really their best advocates are people who are outside. Even people that we get angry at sometimes who ride their four-wheelers through streams and muddy them up and loosen up the sand and all of that, at least they're outdoors. And so they have seen plants, they've seen turkeys, they've seen quail. They know what's good and they have a sense of what's good and bad for those kind of things. So even though sometimes we might seem on opposite sides of the spectrum, there's a lot where we overlap.
Yeah. I hope this is a fair question. Is it sad in a sense that students that can relate to your subject matter from a hunting perspective or from a gardening perspective with their family, there's not as many of those you don't encounter as much of that as you did 20 years ago?
Yeah, it's sad to me. I hope we fill the gap to some degree. As students take labs and have to take field trips, I hope I expose it to them, and some of them are ready to spend more time outside. But it can be difficult. I've had students who just walking outside in the forest close to campus is an interesting activity. And one story I like to tell, there's a really big pitcher plant bog near Wiggins, Mississippi.
Okay.
In fact, some people say it's the largest contiguous pitcher plant in the lower 48. So it's a famous site. It's called Buttercup Flats. And I used to regularly take my students there. And one year I took a student who literally grew up less than 5 miles from that place and did not know that she had ever seen a pitcher plant in her whole life. And so, I take it upon, it's my duty to make sure that she has seen a pitcher plant, and hopefully other students too, that this is in their backyard.
Yeah. How often are new plants being discovered?
More often than you might guess.
Okay.
So especially in tropical parts of the world, they're being found all the time. In fact, people can commit their whole careers to describing new species. In the United States, for example, still more than you might expect, but not a whole lot, several dozen, probably a dozen or more a year are found, usually in very interesting places, or sometimes they take a sort of a broad species and divide it up into narrower species. But yeah, there are all kinds of cases of new species.
Including in Mississippi?
Including in Mississippi. So when I first came to USM in 2005, that very year, a botanist named Steve Leonard, who was working at Camp Shelby, had discovered a new kind of witch hazel, Hamamelis ovalis. And for a while, it was only known from Mississippi, and it's now been found in several other southeastern states. And then a few years ago, we had a quillwort expert visit from Virginia and Wisconsin, 2 of them. And they found a new quillwort species, Isoetes mississippiensis. And today it's only known from a few sites in Pearl River County.
So what is a quillwort?
Oh, that's a hard question. What is a quillwort? Well, it's a plant that looks, yes, it's a plant that looks vaguely like a green onion.
Okay.
It is not a flowering plant. It's not even a seed plant. You could think of it as something close to ferns, but it's from a group of plants that's even more ancient than ferns. It's a lycopod. So a very simple kind of plant, and they make spores at the base of their leaves. And these leaves, like I said, look like green onions or quills, and thus the name quillwort.
Okay.
Where would you like find something like that?
Well, in our part of the state, you can find it in these little scoured, ephemeral blackwater streams. And sometimes they can even be quite common. But the main one in our area is the Louisiana quillwort, which is an endangered plant. or maybe I should say it's on the Endangered Species Act list, but it will eventually be delisted because there is quite a lot of it. But you can imagine if you're looking for a plant that doesn't make flowers and doesn't make seeds, and it looks vaguely like a green onion or a grassy kind of thing, they're kind of easy to overlook. And actually, that botanist I mentioned earlier, Steve Leonard, who discovered the new species of witch hazel, he was the one that found many, many populations in Mississippi.
Okay. So looks a little bit like a green onion, but doesn't smell or taste like one, I'm assuming.
That's right.
Man, when he was saying that, I was thinking, every time I'm thinking of like an endangered species or something, you think of like a panda or, an animal or something.
Right,
Do you ever feel or do you ever feel discouraged that people don't immediately jump to plants when they're talking about endangered species?
Sure, I do. And in fact, the laws are very different for plants and animals. And I don't want to give people reasons or ways to mess up their endangered plants. But yeah, they don't get the attention that animals do. We don't really have that many endangered species in Mississippi, though, of plants.
Yeah. Plants that are edible. Is that something that, is a part of the curriculum, that is a part of what is taught, what you teach? And, I know that's something, again, as somebody who spends time outside, I've always been curious about and tried to learn, where you could, but naturally edible plants, is that something that is taught and covered?
I don't teach a whole lot of it, but I do, like I said, I do teach a part of economic botany where we talk about kinds of plants we eat and where they come from and all those kind of good things, because I do want students to know that just like humans have migrated the world, so have plants. And it's interesting to think about that. I mean, like we think of pizza being Italian food, but there were no tomatoes in Italy in 1500. So pizzas with tomato sauce? No, that's not Italian food. Yeah. Or Thai food with peanuts and chili peppers? No, sorry. Chili peppers and peanuts aren't from Thailand. That's a new thing too. Or potatoes in Ireland.
Yeah, I was going to ask. Yeah.
Even though my grandmother called them Irish potatoes. Actually, I always thought she called them iced potatoes, but I learned later they're Irish potatoes. They're not from Ireland. They're from South America.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to think about where our food comes from.
Yeah, it really is. And you, where did that come from? You come from Pike County.
I come from Amite County.
Amite County, okay.
I was born in Pike County, but I grew up in Liberty.
In Liberty, which, anybody that I guess maybe is old enough to have known who Jerry Clower was or ever heard one of his routines, we at least know about Liberty. I've even been to the old Rexall Drugs, on the corner there,
yes,
where it still has his coffee mug hanging on the wall. Born and raised there. When did the light bulb, go on over a young Mack's head, and that kind of sent you down this path to where now you're a professor of botany at Southern Miss? Like what was the genesis moment for you?
Well, I guess there were two things. One is that both of my families have something to do with plants. So my dad's family from Walthall County, my grandfather was a forester, my dad was a forester, and they also did all kinds of, farming of various sorts at small scale. And then my mother's side of the family, they were truck crop farmers between Terry and Raymond, so grew sweet potatoes and squash and peppers and beans and tomatoes and whatever. So I've always liked plants. Mm-hmm. And then growing up in a small town like Liberty, most guys are expected either to like football or like hunting or both. And honestly, I wasn't really built for football, and I didn't like hunting that much. So I gravitated toward what my parents did, and I always liked plants.
Yeah. Did you then hit high school knowing that this is the route you were going to go, or was it a college thing where it sort of developed for you as a career?
It certainly developed. I liked a whole lot of different things. I liked music. In fact, I thought that music might be a career, and until my teacher told me that I needed to, what was the word she used? I needed to be married to the piano. And I was not going to marry the piano. And I liked chemistry and I liked all kind of subjects. When I was in college, though, I took a class with Bill Stark at Mississippi College in systematic zoology, and I really liked systematics or taxonomy. I like organizing things.
Mm-hmm.
What do we call things? And when I was working at the Natural Science Museum, one of the zoologists there, Tom Mann, he put me on a project to collect freshwater mussels from the Emmett River to sort of follow up on some work that Paul Hartfield, the Fish and Wildlife Service, had done. And I just loved walking up and down streams, picking up freshwater mussel shells, organizing, seeing the diversity of things out there and then organizing them, identifying them. I liked that. But I've always liked plants, so I think I just wanted to continue in that way. It's really amazing. I got into grad school to study plants when I had never had a plant taxonomy class.
How about that? And the museum, the job at the museum, was that immediately after college for you?
No, that was while I was in college.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So at the end of my first year, I applied for a job at the museum to work with the heritage program. And I was hoping to do a lot of field work, again, get outside because I like to be outside. And it rained a lot. And they found out that I knew how to use computers. I could make a macro. And so basically I spent the next 3 years doing databasing work at the museum. But every so often I would get to go out with some of the scientists when they were looking for mussels or plants or other things.
Yeah. I heard you say a little bit ago, and then fast forward when you came back to Hattiesburg, to Southern Miss. So between the museum and Southern Miss, what was going on?
Well, I got my master's at Duke University in North Carolina.
Okay.
And I was there for 2 years. And that's where I got introduced to the tropics and fell in love with tropical plants. And they have been the focus of a lot of my research. So I think all the new species I've ever described were tropical.
Okay.
I don't think I've described a timber. I'm have to think now. And after those 2 years, then I went to Cornell in upstate New York to work on my PhD. And then I taught 1 year at the Ohio State University and a job opened at USM and they gave me the offer. So I came.
And the rest is history.
The rest is history.
And back home for you.
Yes.
So I told you maybe a dumb question. Tropicals, is that here? Is that us? Is that Mississippi, parts of Mississippi, or no? We don't have any of that.
We are not officially in the tropical zone.
Okay.
So the tropics themselves are places on Earth where the sunlight strikes the Earth at a right angle at least 1 day per year. And here in Mississippi, we don't actually get sunlight at a right angle. It's always at an angle, but not straight up, not a 90-degree angle. So you could say we're sort of at the edge of subtropical to temperate here.
Yeah. Very cool. Research, ongoing research. Is there, something you're interested in right now, working on right now, or that our listeners would find interesting that they might not know about regarding plants, in Mississippi?
In Mississippi, in particular, this past summer, I had some students work in my lab, and I started some work on mosses. So mosses are pretty small plants, and Mississippi's never had any extensive survey of mosses. So I had a student start with a small project of collecting and identifying all the mosses at the Lake Thoreau Environmental Center, which is in Hattiesburg and owned by USM. And so she found about 50 species there. And so this semester, I have another student who's following up with her project, and he's also working on a draft list of all the mosses of Mississippi. Now, outside of Mississippi with my tropical work, a few years ago, I spent a year in Africa on a Fulbright scholarship, and I've got quite a few new species of dayflowers. These are things related to spiderworts.
Okay.
You know those that I'm working on. And so, in fact, I've got one of those. I need to submit a paper on that soon.
Yeah, that's really cool. And another thing, just an observation is I get to hear you talk about, the different subjects. Students are heavily involved. It's not just a personal thing for you, is it? I mean, you've talked as much about the work and research that students have done and are doing as you have your own, it seems like, and just in our conversation.
Yeah, well, any student that expresses an interest in plants, I am happy to mentor. I mean, there are really only two to three, depending on how you call our mycologist, botanist at USM. So if we have students interested in plants, they usually gravitate to one of us, and I'm happy to help them as much as I can find their passion in life, which may or may not involve plants. In fact, I had a grad student who's now a PhD/DVM student at Mississippi State. So he's going to be a vet and working on parasites of reptiles. So, but he tells me the plant knowledge has been useful.
Okay, so. Right. As far as you're concerned,
yeah,
that's great. Dr. Alford, thanks again for coming by. It's really cool to just get a little insight into what's going on in your world and kind of how you're teaching things at Southern Miss. Just appreciate you coming by and give us some time on the podcast.
Sure, it was a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to meet you. Enjoyed that. Hope you did too. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you outdoors.